Overnight, something impossible showed up in the data. An entire trade relationship, worth billions, just vanished in a single reporting cycle. Not reduced, not delayed, erased. No soybeans leaving American ports, no rare earth magnets clearing Chinese regulators. And the silence coming out of Beijing wasn't hesitation. It looked calculated, as if someone had quietly flipped a switch that no one in Washington knew existed. By the time U.S. officials repeated that the deal is on track, ministries across Asia were already reacting as if it had fallen apart. Thailand launched a political revolt over mining access. Malaysia's government scrambled to defend an agreement its own lawmakers said never should have been signed. And China, without issuing a single warning, managed to freeze three countries' plans simply by refusing to move first. If this is the opening move, then every government involved is already out of position, because the breakdown didn't start with a crisis. It started with everyone realizing the others were acting on a completely different version of the deal. Good morning never lands softly when markets are already waking up in shock. Traders in Shanghai had barely finished their first coffee when the overnight customs sheets dropped on internal terminals, showing 0 new soybean bookings from U.S. ports, an absence so complete it became its own headline. Reuters analysts flagged it before sunrise, noting that Chinese importers appeared to be deliberately holding position despite U.S. officials insisting that a wave of orders was imminent. In agricultural markets, silence is rarely neutral. It usually means someone is withholding leverage. That tension doubled when the Wall Street Journal published fresh reporting that China had no intention of approving rare earth magnet exports to U.S. defense contractors. Bloomberg added that China's Ministry of Commerce had tightened its licensing reviews again this week, raising compliance thresholds for neodymium and dysprosium flows. The metals feed into missile guidance assemblies, aircraft actuators, and radar components, and the new rules impose penalties severe enough to shut firms out of the sector entirely. Escalation appears immediately. If core materials freeze, downstream industries stall. Scott Bessent attempted to calm the landscape in remarks summarized by the Financial Times, saying he still hoped a formal agreement with Beijing could be completed by Thanksgiving. But his phrasing, policy outcomes depend on ongoing technical discussions, signaled that Washington knew no definitive commitments were in hand. Markets read that carefully. Grain traders call this kind of uncertainty dead air, because nothing moves until someone breaks the silence. Why this matters: when commodity flows slow, political strain accelerates. Across Asia, governments that sign trade frameworks with Washington are realizing that the fine print sits heavier than the ceremony. Thailand is discovering that the agreement its prime minister signed includes priority rights for United States firms to develop mining concessions in the north. Opposition parties accused him of endangering sovereign control over strategic minerals, and the Bangkok Post reported that parliamentary committees were caught off guard by the extent of the commitments. Mining sector unions warn that domestic firms may be locked out of future projects, raising fears of foreign-defined industrial planning. When states lose control of inputs, they lose control of outcomes. Malaysia's crisis unfolded faster. The memorandum signed with Washington was released with celebratory language, but the reaction inside Kuala Lumpur hit like a political landslide. Malaysia possesses more than 16 million tons of rare earth deposits, according to Reuters, and imposed an export ban 2 years ago to build domestic refining and separation capacity. The strategy was designed to keep billions in value-added production inside the country. But the memorandum's requirement to prioritize United States buyers threatens to unwind the entire national plan. The core problem is that Malaysia was already deep into negotiations with Chinese firms to import advanced processing technologies. The Financial Times noted that China controls about 90% of global refining capacity, a dominance rooted in decades of engineering experience and highly specialized equipment. Malaysia lacked those capabilities entirely, which is why its export ban targeted foreign companies capable of building domestic value chains. Thousands of skilled technical jobs were projected for new processing corridors. Nikkei Asia's analysis of the memorandum uncovered a clause allowing the United States to terminate the agreement if Malaysia signs deals with partners Washington considers problematic. Another clause requires Malaysia to mirror United States import restrictions against third countries upon request. The combined effect suggested that Malaysia may have surrendered regulatory autonomy in key sectors. Bloomberg reported that foreign investors immediately flagged the risk that Malaysia could be forced to take positions contrary to its own economic interest. Why this matters is that foreign capital avoids jurisdictions where policy is not controlled domestically. Political shockwaves followed instantly. Opposition parties accused Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim of severe misjudgment, and parliamentary debates grew heated as legislators demanded explanations. Trade Minister Zafrul Aziz insisted the rare earth export ban remained in effect and claimed the memorandum did not override domestic law, but legal scholars interviewed by the New Straits Times were unconvinced. Ambiguity, they warned, invites arbitration disputes later. Legal uncertainty suppresses long-term investment before the first machine arrives. From Beijing's vantage point, the situation changed overnight. Chinese regulators were already concerned about environmental and material quality risks at Malaysian mining sites, an issue highlighted in a Reuters investigation last year. Now they face a more strategic dilemma. If Malaysia prioritizes the United States for finished materials, any Chinese investment risks strengthening United States supply chains. That contradicts the regulatory principles Beijing tightened in 2023, which require firms to ensure their technologies do not indirectly support foreign defense industries. That's how cross-border projects become strategic vulnerabilities overnight. Chinese firms that had been considering long-term Malaysian partnerships are pulling back into risk review mode. The South China Morning Post reported that companies evaluating multi-billion-dollar packages, including equipment shipments, on-site engineering teams, and technology transfer components, now worry that Malaysia cannot guarantee market direction. Without certainty, the incentives evaporate. Local Malaysian economies that expected high-tech industrial corridors may see those projections evaporate before ground is broken. Anwar's meeting with China's premier, described by Xinhua as an attempt to stabilize momentum, underscored the intensity of the crisis. Anwar asked that Chinese investment plans move forward as intended, but the unspoken contradiction sat at the center of the room. How can Malaysia request Chinese technology while committing to give the United States first rights to materials produced with that technology? And if Malaysia ignored the clause, what would Washington demand in response? Every reassurance becomes a new source of doubt. Meanwhile, the United States faces its own credibility challenges. USDA export data released earlier this month showed U.S. soybean sales to China falling below last year's levels. Analysts interviewed by Reuters noted that the trade dynamics Washington promised would revitalize Midwest farming communities have not materialized. The Des Moines Register quoted one cooperative manager saying, "We prepared for movement that still hasn't come. Grain elevators expanded storage, expecting Chinese orders that never arrived, and price volatility has already begun disrupting hedging strategies." Misaligned political expectations translate into real economic loss. Beijing continues tightening oversight across its mineral sector. The Ministry of Commerce described its licensing expansions as part of a security modernization initiative. Analysts told the Financial Times that regulators are especially concerned about downstream traceability, fearing that materials or technologies could be routed through third countries and eventually reach defense contractors. Structural pressure rises because these concerns directly intersect with Malaysia's new commitments, making cooperation harder at every level. Thailand is encountering similar contradictions. Its opposition parties argue that priority mining rights granted to U.S. firms could undermine domestic industrial strategies. The Bangkok Post reported protests from mining cooperatives worried that foreign operators could shape development schedules in ways that disadvantage local industries. Parliamentary committees have launched preliminary reviews to assess the legal implications of the agreement. Workers in mining communities fear decisions will be made offshore rather than in local planning offices. The IMF's October outlook warned that geopolitical fragmentation is reshaping investment flows in emerging markets, especially in technology-intensive sectors. The report highlighted rare earth projects as among the most exposed because they depend on predictable long-term partnerships. Why this matters? When trust collapses, capital doesn't just slow, it reroutes. In Washington, officials who expected agricultural gains in strategic mineral agreements now face a widening gap between diplomatic announcements and material outcomes. In Kuala Lumpur, legislators argue over whether the memorandum is binding, and if it is not, why it was signed. In Beijing, regulators attempt to prevent technology from leaking toward defense chains they cannot monitor. Inside Malaysia, the stakes deepen. Legal analysts told the New Straits Times that if the memorandum were interpreted strictly, Malaysia might have to seize equipment or technologies belonging to Chinese partners if U.S. law required diversion. Such a scenario, though politically extreme, shows how vulnerable the memorandum has made ongoing negotiations. Once seizure risk enters the conversation, no foreign partner can commit confidently. Thailand faces legislative gridlock as its opposition demands renegotiation. Malaysia faces investor hesitation, diplomatic strain, and a credibility test at home. China faces a narrowing band of countries it can trust with technological assets. And the United States faces agricultural communities watching promised markets evaporate. Agreements meant to structure cooperation now block cooperation. Commitments meant to signal reliability now amplify doubt. Clauses introduced to protect sovereignty now expose it. Every participant is trapped by the terms they hoped would free them. Across the Pacific, American farmers check export dashboards that still show no Chinese volumes. Across Malaysia, ministries draft clarifications for agreements that no one interprets the same way. Across China, regulators update compliance protocols that tighten the boundaries of permissible engagement. And across Thailand, political factions fight to determine whether their country ceded more than it gained. Deals collapse when parties walk away. But this rupture is stranger. The deals remain in place, and it is their continued existence that is causing the fracture. The text holds, the trust breaks, and as long as signatures stay unaltered, the cost of honoring them grows heavier, and the cost of breaking them grows heavier still. Some crises erupt from a single failure. This one grows because no one has failed yet. We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe. Check out another video that is now on your screen.